Welcome back. I'm Ray. This is Ollie.
This is the only podcast that matters.
And it is. And we're here to do part 2 of the Stooges and Iggy Pop. Yeah.
Iggy Pop.
I keep saying I'm really excited about this episode, about every episode, because I am.
I know. Talked about earlier about how like the Stooges is the first punk band. And we're really excited to get
And the background was really fun to do, but I'm excited to do the 3 albums because they're all so different.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. I don't think at the first glance, the first time you listen to the Stooges discography,
you don't think about
that
it,
you, but when you know what's going into them and you get to know what's going on behind the scenes, they're so different to me now.
It's so fun to like really deep dive into this stuff.
It really is.
And it's so cool to see them progress over the 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the core.
I said progress. Really
I know, but I misspeak all the time and I don't edit it out ever.
That way.
Yeah, I'm excited because there's core members, and then there's some people who are involved that really you can't not hear the influence of these different people once you know. Before we get into it, our game that we're going to play with every band.
Yeah.
What is not
our theme song?
Not your favorite song, your theme song.
Stooges theme song. You go first.
Okay, well, I have, for Iggy Pop's solo career,
okay.
This is something that I've always thought would be my theme song since forever.
Right.
Is Real Wild Child. That was always the manic Gemini that I am.
Yeah, I love that for you.
Specifically, there's a Josie and the Pussycats cover from the movie.
Oh my God.
That's
dude. That's literally perfect for
That's
you.
so me. Josie and the Pussycats
What's
singing
your favorite
Iggy Pop.
version?
Definitely the Josie and the Pussycats version.
Yeah.
That album's a banger. It's a very good movie.
You do love that album.
But if I was doing the Stooges in a similar vein for a similar reason, I would have to do Search and Destroy.
Okay, fuck yeah.
The opening lines are just, it's the imagery. It's there.
So badass.
It is good.
Yeah, I think mine is Down on the Street because it's just like that guitar and bass and drum kick in.
Yeah.
Like, oh!
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to go fuck
the
shit
rhythm
up.
section in that song goes so hard.
And he just goes, ugh. And I'm like, I'm here.
Should every song we talk about, we do an impression of it?
It suck you right in.
It does suck you right in.
Into the album,
yeah.
That is, of course, from Funhouse, right?
Yeah, Funhouse, which is your favorite album.
I think so, but it's honestly, it's a toss-up, dude. Raw Power's so good.
I have mixed feelings about Raw Power being my favorite. We'll get to it. Yeah. So we left off our part 1, which I recommend you listen to part 1 first, although we said that about Lou Reed episode, and for some reason, our Lou Reed part 2 on YouTube has like 500 something views, and part 1 has like 100 views.
Sometimes I do that. I'm like, I bet part 2's better.
So Aries of you to be like, get to the point.
I'd be like, let's go on the road.
Yeah. But anyway, so part 2 here, we're talking about the album. So we left off in 1969. We did a brief rundown of like what was going on, who the members were, how they met, how they got together, when they learned they should finally start practicing, etc.
Right. Maybe start actually playing music. Yeah. Instead of just saying like, we're in a band.
So the Stooges, something I would say about the Stooges, this is something that I've said to you before, but I think some music hits you in the gut and some music hits you in the heart, and the Stooges hit me in the head. They just kind of like bang on your cranium.
It is. It's like, it's unpleasant at times.
It's anxiety inducing at times.
You can't ignore it. It can't be background music.
By design.
Yeah, right.
It was made to make you uncomfortable. It was made to, we talked about they were like playing like
vacuum cleaners.
Vacuums.
Oil drums.
Yeah,
right. Playing.
Yeah, playing.
That's a strong word for it.
Yeah, it was by design. It's anxiety inducing. There was a point I was in a hotel in Chicago and I was like, why am I having a panic attack? And then I turned
off the Stooges.
Track 3 of the Stooges self-titled off, and I was like,
oh, cool.
Yeah, I wasn't having a panic attack. I was listening to an incredibly anxiety-inducing, like, 10-minute chant.
Yeah.
And then I turned off the Stooges, and I was fine again. And I was like, do I even like the Stooges?
Yeah. But then you do.
But I do. I like it a lot.
You keep coming back to it.
I don't like that song, I guess.
Yeah, that's not my favorite either.
Yeah, it's okay. So 1969. So at this point, we talked about Michigan being what it was when they came together. They weren't really cool. They were kind of burnouts. They were losers. They were weird, but not in a way that was like...
Not in a hot way.
Not in a hot way.
Yeah.
By 1969, by the time they've been playing around, they've got a little bit of a name for themselves. They're going and they're going to start recording their first album. The scene in Michigan had changed, and they had gotten some of a reputation, and now, like, Girls like them. They're cool to be seen with. They're entering this first album with on a little bit of a high, some confidence. That's
they're
a new.
Feeling themselves.
They're feeling themselves because other people are feeling them.
Girls like them.
Girls like them, and they're cool.
Yeah. That's probably why most men get into rock and roll.
Probably.
I mean, when I say probably, I mean that is.
This 100%.
Why most men get into rock and roll.
Yes, 100%. I want to say one more thing before we start talking about the music they're making, which is that most music evolves from what came before it.
Right.
Most music is an evolution. Like you will see classes
building
called
upon.
Building Upon. The Stooges didn't really evolve from rock and roll so much as they devolved from it. They were stripping things away. What was going on in the 60s, we had talked about this in our first episode, like rejecting hippie culture, rejecting these long, 10-minute long solos. And they were like, Ron shredded, but he never played anything he didn't need to play.
Right.
Scotty on drums could play straight down the line.
Yeah.
Iggy's lyrics were to the point. Part of that, like
hitting... talked about like purposely cutting lyrics out to try and get like directly to the point. Right?
I didn't know that, but I could so see that. It shows. Do you ever hear Stephen King says to write is human and to edit is divine?
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
Stephen King's so cool. Well, basically the Stooges are like, they're setting the guidelines for what punk will be. It's stripped down. It's raw, right? I mean, it's literally as simple and as straightforward and as loud and in your face as it could be.
We haven't yet gotten away from the 10-minute songs, as we'll see some of their tracks are longer, but we are getting closer to the 90-second in your face, get on the stage, get off, what the Ramones are going to do. Like the Stooges they're heading in that direction.
Right.
Their best songs are shorter, are more abrasive, are to the point. They haven't totally ditched the long rock and roll thing. We're going to see 8 and 10-minute tracks on all of their albums. But we can see how we get to the Ramones from here.
Totally.
We can see how, like, this is punk.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a far reach anymore. It's
no. I mean, now, by the time they're done, we're in the 70s.
Yeah, exactly.
Their first album is the last year, 1969, and it was released the same week as Woodstock.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy? So, like, the height of the hippie movement is happening in August of 1969. The same week...
the
first punk band puts out the first punk record. Like,
so
they're
cool.
like, by the way, we're done with y'all. We're coming for you. All right, so the album. So the first album, where are we at?
Self-titled. It was recorded, or, you know, like, the songwriting was written over 2 days. Because you told me.
This is so funny of them.
This is crazy.
This is so them. They're such hooligans.
I know.
Danny Fields picks them up. Danny Fields brings John Cale to a show in Michigan to show him the MC5. Right. And John Cale's like not interested in the MC5, falls in love with the Stooges, calls
Who's that opening act?
He's like, who's that guy? Calls them. The Stooges are thrilled because they're huge Velvet Underground fans. Right. So obviously John Cale is the guy that is to us underrated from the Velvet Underground. He wants to bring them into New York, record them at the Hit Factory.
Yes.
So he calls them up, he brings them in, and he's like, you guys have songs ready to go? You got an album ready? And they're like, yeah, we got an album ready. And they're like, we have 2 songs.
And they're like, so over a course of 2 days.
2 songs, and one of them's a jam with no structure. Right. They hole up at the famous Chelsea Hotel, which is like Patti Smith, Andy Warhol, like iconic hotel that everyone lived at, at the Chelsea Hotel. Yeah. They hole up at the Chelsea Hotel for 2 days. They write 10 songs or 8 songs, however many on the first album. And then for 2 days, they record them all.
Right.
And the whole album is start to finish written to recorded in 4 days in New York City.
And it was recorded at the Hit Factory, like you said, which was literally located over a sex shop, like right off of Times Square. So, you know, like they're in like the dirt and the grit of this era, and they're making this music that is like totally in line with it. And it's so interesting to just like how far they've come from their like trailer park in Michigan.
Yeah.
And from their like, you know, it's just a really interesting fucking journey.
They're already in the scene.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
they're cool now.
Yeah,
they're working with their heroes. Yeah, they're in New York. They aren't 100% immersed in the New York scene yet, the way we're going to see later when they come back to New York in later years. But they are being well received. I mean, like, if you have one of your heroes wanting to record you,
big deal.
You've made it,
and
as far as I'm concerned.
Like, John Cale really approached, like all of their producers, he's like, you know, I want to try and capture this live sound.
Yes.
Because he'd seen them live. So he had a very minimalist approach to recording. Very stripped down and hypnotic, and gritty but restrained. You know what I mean?
He wanted to capture their live sound. He wanted to capture the fact that Iggy could be like an animal and be violent and then be hugging you in the next minute.
Yeah.
And he wanted to capture like Iggy's essence.
Right.
And he did so by respecting their autonomy so much and really I will say the one thing he wanted to say, though.
What?
He comes in, they've got a fridge full of beer and no food. And they're like, what do you guys eat? And Iggy's like, whatever. Oh, we'll eat something. Yeah. They're coming in. They're used to playing live. Like, the Stooges are like, you play with these huge Marshall stacks. We play all the way turned up. That's their whole thing. Yeah. So they come into this recording studio with their huge Marshall stacks,
dingy room,
ready to turn up. And John Cale's like, this is a small space. We play small amps. Like, they've never recorded before, and they have no intimidation about this. Right. Like, they come in ready to go. They're like, we got this.
They're feeling themselves.
They are. And John Cale's like, no, we have to play small amps on volume 3. And they're like, Marshall stacks to 10. And John Cale's like, small amps to 4? And they're like, Marshall's that. They settled on, this was their compromise. The Marshall stacks turned up to 9.
Oh, good for them.
They gave him a whole number. They called it compromising. Yeah. Like, they considered it a compromise. Their words.
I feel like one of the things, like, we talked about John Cale wanting to give them their autonomy, and one of the ways he did that was by having Iggy in the room with the band, which is not normally done in a recording session. You have an isolated vocal booth. But Iggy's like, fuck that, you know, I got to be in the space
and
with the
Iggy's
boys.
Like crawling around on the amps like he does at a show.
Right.
And actually, John Cale, one of his notes to them was, in order to record an album, you have to leave the stage behind, to which Iggy
said no.
Did not do. Yeah. Again, not much of a compromise there. But like John Cale, he offered guidance, but he really ultimately left it up to them, which is the only thing. What are you gonna do? Control the Stooges?
Which is a nice thing when you have like a true musician producing an album, and just respecting the band. You know what I mean? It doesn't always happen that way, and he did a good job of respecting them for sure.
Yeah, I think he understood the assignment.
Right.
And his mix is a little bit tinny, but that's not because he was a bad producer. He left it a little bit tinny by design to reflect what they sounded like live, to reflect some of the abrasiveness and uncomfortableness of it. So if you listen to it and it's not your favorite mix, this is not because he doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah, like, for what it's worth.
Yeah. John Cale knows what he's doing.
Yes, he does.
And that's why the label brought him in. Label brought in John Cale to, like, contain the band or to try and, like, squeeze them into a record. And John Cale was like, no, we're just going to do it the way they want to do it.
Yeah.
It came out great.
It did come out great.
Such hits as, like, 1969 and No Fun are just instant fucking bangers.
They're very fun. And 1969, I want to draw attention to something. 1969, the opening track is about, it's not even like he doesn't have something to do. It's like there isn't anything to do. He's talking about boredom. He is describing how the landscape of 1969 is, he is so restless and so bored. I want to put a pin in that because I'm going to come back to that song later.
It's also very Midwest of him.
Yeah. He was living in...
That's a common theme of people from that era.
Yeah. Sorry, he was literally inventing punk rock. Yeah. What comes out of this is there are a lot of people in New York, there's a lot of writers in New York who are Iggy fans, but not fans of the Stooges. Right. You're going to see other artists, you're going to see photographers, you're going to see a lot of people be fans of Iggy, but not the Stooges. And he is not interested in going solo for a long time. And something that happens, there's a larger conversation that starts happening after this album comes out, after it gets good reviews, that people start to realize that we don't need to talk about good versus bad. Mm-hmm. We can talk about what's effective, what's interesting, what you like. Right. And it doesn't have to, is it good? Who fucking cares?
Does it make you feel something?
Does it make you, is it art? Is it punk? I mean, punk isn't good necessarily. Right. For it to be cool and fun and likable.
These are journalists who are starting to write about them differently.
Like these like critics that were starting to say, that's actually not the bar for art. Like people who are a little bit stuck up, where it's like, buckle up. If you care about good versus bad, you're not going to be in the punk rock scene at all. Right. This ain't for you. Yeah. So there's a larger conversation that starts after the release of this album, after the reviews of this album start coming out. People start to, like, writers in the scene start to wake up to, like, maybe we don't need to be such fucking snobs, which is cool. That's a direct effect that album had on critics in New York City.
That's awesome.
It's very cool, right?
I mean, it was, I don't think it had quite the effect that, like, we look at that album now as, like, groundbreaking. At the time, it didn't come out, it wasn't necessarily, like, commercially successful, But
No.
the people in that scene, the other musicians, they were like, this is amazing. And of course, like you said, the critics were starting to recognize something in the Stooges.
When you get Lester Bangs in your corner, you're going to get some good reviews.
Exactly.
That guy knows how to write a review.
He does.
I could read 3 paragraphs from him in every episode we do. I think I should just start sharing Lester Bangs reviews online for on our Instagram because they're so good. Yeah, so that's 1969. So then 1970
comes along.
Funhouse.
Yeah,
your favorite.
Yeah, it is. They end up going to LA for this. So Elektra brings them to one of their studios.
By the way,
LA.
they're riding such a high from their first album that they are writing Funhouse while they are on tour for the self-titled.
Exactly, yeah.
They are coming in so hot.
Yeah.
They are so excited about how their first album turned out. They're so proud of it. They're so hyped about it. They're not making commercial success, but they're successful on their own terms.
Right.
And so they're already writing Funhouse on the tails of their first. There's just momentum, is my point.
And the other thing that I noticed about this recording of Funhouse is they were a little bit more professional in their approach of it. Like, not only had they had a full album written instead of just saying they did, but they also They took it seriously. Like, it was a longer session. I think we looked between, it was either 2 weeks or 6 weeks. We couldn't figure that out.
You saw that it was supposed to be 2 weeks and it was 2 months. I saw it was supposed to be 6 weeks and it was 6 months.
A lot longer than 2 days either way.
Point is, it wasn't 2 days at the Hits Factory.
Yeah.
And what we're going to see too is Dave Alexander gets more involved because he's Dave Alexander's on the bass. So the original lineup in the second album is Scotty Ashton on drums, Ron Ashton on guitar, Dave Alexander on bass, and Iggy singing, which talked about that lineup in the first episode. Dave on bass more than anybody else was sort of taking directions or just playing what was needed. We see him start to take pride in the band at this point, and he actually starts writing songs or writing bass parts and being more involved. And he wrote Dirt and Funhouse.
Oh, no way, I didn't know that.
Dave Alexander wrote both of those songs. Like,
that's awesome.
He really steps in and starts to contribute, and I think this is the album. The first album, yes. The third album, we're going to see some drama. This is the album more than ever where the core members are all contributing so much.
Which we love.
I love team players.
One of my favorite facts, I read a little, Iggy Pop wrote an article about the recording of this when there was a special edition that came out or whatever. And he was talking about how the band is like I said, being a little more serious. They're maybe smoking a little weed and drinking some beers, but they're not doing their heavy drugs and they're taking this seriously, except Iggy on the sly is taking acid every day and hiding it from the rest of the band.
That's so funny because we're going to talk about Steve McKay being brought in on sax on this. And what Iggy likes about him is that he has this freestyle jazz sensibility. Yeah, exactly. And so Iggy's like, this is funky.
Yeah, everyone else is like, this is pretty out there. And he's this is perfect.
This is sweet spot. This is also produced now by Don Gallucci.
Yes.
And Don Gallucci ditches, John Cale was pretty flexible with them, but Don Gallucci even more ditches the formal recording of doing different tracks and gets them all together in this one room. And I have a funny story about the recording room. Don Gallucci brings them into this beautiful space.
Yes.
This is a huge step up from what they were doing at the Hit Factory.
Main studios, right?
It's one of their main studios. It's beautifully designed. It's beautifully soundproofed. State of the art. And then they come in and they're clean sounds. These guys, they don't even just take out soundproofing booths or tool, they tear the walls out. They take
it down to the fucking
the
jeans.
Carpets out.
Yeah.
They tear this room down.
Yeah.
And they're still not dirty enough. They are not satisfied. They're they can't get enough chaos in there. They literally they tear the carpets out of this room.
It's amazing.
They tear the walls down.
I'm sure the label was thrilled.
Yeah. But they're what are you gonna do? Not let the Stooges be the Stooges?
Yeah.
It's naive to try to control them.
Right.
It's kind of on you.
Right. Another thing that Dave Alexander did in this is just literally put some mics in the room just to catch that bleed, which normally producers don't want bleed so they can mix better.
Right.
Dave Alexander's fuck it, threw a couple mics up there.
Everybody in their own way tries to capture their live sound.
Yep.
And we get a little bit closer, I think, with each album. But that's everybody's goal is I just want to get their lot because
they must have been so fucking good live.
I know.
Can you imagine?
Elektra Studios.
Do you want to create a time machine or to invent a time machine?
Invent a time machine so we can. This is what I would do with a time machine, I would go back to 1977 for as long as until my meds ran out, and then I would go home because I really do need my meds. Yeah.
Can you imagine like a Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but it's Ollie and Ray's Excellent Adventure?
I would love that. Guys, if you have time travel tips, call us.
Like, we need it more than most people.
It would be the only time I would feel a little bit nervous about my sobriety.
Yeah. Oh.
We would have to go together. Yeah. We would have to really hold ourselves accountable.
That would be hard.
1977.
I think we would just do 1977 on loop, just over and over and over, just because there's so much to like watch and do.
Yeah, there's so many shows.
Like, you know what? We didn't even bother looking at the Ramones this year. Let's go
back
we got
to Sex Pistols.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's actually 1977. Like you could catch the end of the Sex Pistols and the beginning of Sid Vicious's solo career in the same year. But anyway, we digress. Track I want to talk about on this album.
Okay.
Taking the pin out of the 1969 track.
Oh my God, I remember you pinned it earlier.
Yeah, we pinned it earlier.
We're back.
Okay.
Okay.
1970. I think it's the third track on this album. It's one of the tracks on this album.
It's one of the numbers.
It's definitely in there. They're describing the opposite feeling.
Yeah.
This is like, we're burning the town down. Yes. We're like, they're talking about like the imagery. It's just like life is on fire.
Yeah.
There's so much to do. They're burning it down. It's like, life is groovy. Yeah. It's just such an opposite fan. And I think it's so funny when bands make like The Clash has a song 1977. Like they have these like I think it would be really funny for us to write a song called 2025.
Yeah, it wouldn't really hit different.
I would never write a song like it's so silly if you think about doing it about the year you're in, but bands used to do it all the time.
But I'm sure they did that on purpose to be like, look at how much has changed in the last year. Yeah.
And it's just such a different vibe. Like you can just see
the song, the music vibe too is so different.
It's so different. I know it is. I just think it's so interesting to do those tracks 1 year apart about those years, and like their life couldn't be more different. They're writing from such a different place, and it's like I wish they did that with Raw Power. I wish we got like 1972 or whatever year it was recorded. But I just think it's so interesting that if you sit down and you just sit through their discography,
right.
You are along for the journey in such a concrete way with those two tracks.
Yeah, it really does sum it up. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's so different.
So this album comes out, right? And like, what's happening with Iggy and the band after this album's out?
Well, they are now like have a reputation for being a dangerous band. They're performing live. His drug use, it's going to do this thing where he goes in and out of how bad his drug use is. So
he always does that, right?
A lot of times when he's in California, he's at his cleanest or he's at his worst.
Yeah, he's eating sushi at the vegan restaurant.
Yeah, he's like eating vegan and like only drinking water, or he's using heroin. A lot of it. Yeah, so he's in this place. They're kind of trashing the hotel. They're kind of a mess. Sort of hypocritically, after the release of this album, Dave Alexander gets fired for drinking and smoking too much.
Right.
Which is like...
That sounds just like an excuse.
It sounds like anything. And well, Iggy will say, I love firing people. Iggy's like, fuck you, you're fired. Like he loves firing people. He loves telling people, fuck you, you don't work for me anymore. I don't work for you, you work for me. Like he... For being such a sweet... little cuddle bug, he sure does like firing people.
Yeah, he definitely he goes back and forth.
He's a complicated guy.
Yeah, he is a complicated man.
He's on such a high and he's like living such a rock and roll lifestyle. He calls the vice president of Elektra, Bill Harvey, and he's like, I really need you to give me $400 so I can buy a quarter ounce of cocaine. I just, like, you got to send me $400 for cocaine right now.
How much of his Rolodex he went through before he got to the record executive. He's like,
Danny Fields isn't that rich?
He definitely has the money.
Because Danny Fields probably would have if he could have. Danny Fields loves them. He's like, he's Elektra's guy. Like, he's Elektra's guy out in the streets. Yeah. Fine. He books, we're going to do a Danny Fields episode, but he books the Velvet Underground, he books the Stooges, he books the Dolls,
the Doors before all this.
The Doors before. Like, he's the guy who, like, has his ear to the ground and knows what's cool.
He's so cool.
And he's in love with these guys. Danny Fields is gay, and he's in love with all these rock stars that he's signing. And so probably if he could have, he would have given Iggy Pop $400 for cocaine. But he's like, he doesn't, so I got to call Bill Harvey up and see what that... And he was appalled. Yeah. He's the VP of Elektra. Like, he's not punk.
He's not tuned in.
We're still inventing punk right now. Like, he doesn't... Like, the fuck you
mean?
Did
he give it to him?
Not that I know of. Couldn't find it.
I'm sure he did.
I'm sure he got it.
Yeah, he figured it out.
Yeah. If I know anything about cocaine, is if you want it bad enough, you're gonna get your hands on it.
That's true.
It's not as hard as it should be.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I feel like, if I'm remembering correctly, this album was also a little bit of a commercial flop.
Yes.
Right? And so, like, what ends up happening is the band is starting to, like, right, they fire Dave Alexander, and they're starting to sort of, like, drift apart a little bit. They're starting more infighting. If I remember correctly, don't the Ashton brothers end up back in Michigan at their parents' house at some point?
Ashton brothers end up at Michigan. Iggy goes there again, but they leave before him. Everyone's getting... At points, we're going to see people just get fed up with his drug use.
Right.
And we've talked about it a little bit before, but Ron is always feeling like an outsider.
Right, because he doesn't drink or do drugs.
He doesn't drink or do drugs, and he's often just kind of on his own. And he feels uninterested, but also ostracized by them. Mm-hmm. And he will ultimately say that the reason they broke up, there's two reasons. And one of them, he just blames on heroin use. We're not at that point yet, but we are at the point where they're like, yeah, we're going home.
Yeah.
And Iggy's like, what do you mean, California, dude? But eventually he does end up back home.
Right.
And he does follow them.
They're also living with their parents again, right?
They're living with their parents. They all are, I think. Yeah. Enter James Williamson.
Oh.
Yeah.
I feel like James Williamson is like, you know, in like the westerns when there's like the really badass cowboy in all black.
Yes,
that's James Williamson.
Absolutely.
And it's like the Jaws theme almost when he walks onto the scene.
You're nailing it.
You know what I mean?
You're nailing it. Yeah. Lee Black Childers, who will get an episode as well, who's a photographer, is like, he is a monster. I have nothing nice to say about him. He says the nicest thing I could say about him is that he didn't walk into my room and cut my throat while I was sleeping.
Oh my God. Can you imagine having that be the nicest thing someone can think to say to you? He didn't fucking murder me.
He didn't slit my throat in my sleep. So he's not all bad.
Yeah, I guess he's got that one redeeming quality.
For not murdering. It's a great quality. Actually, it is a really good quality.
Well, yeah, like most people do have it.
Yes. Yeah. I'm glad you have that quality.
Yeah, same dude.
Yeah. So he enters. Listen. Ron is going to kick himself for this later.
Yeah.
Ron brings him in not thinking he's a threat at all. Ron's on guitar. James Williamson is a guitar player. What he lacks in understanding the groove of the band, he makes up for in being a fully formed musician. Mm-hmm. Like, Iggy has kind of taught Ron and Scott everything they know. And what they lack in technical ability, they've always made up for by being on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
They can jam. They can write songs together.
And
James Williamson comes in. He's sitting in on some rehearsals. He seems innocent enough. Ron's like, let's get a second guitarist in here. It seems harmless. James comes in and he's watching. He's sitting in on the practices. He's not even pretending to be in the band yet. In hindsight, people see it that he was sort of studying the politics of the band, figuring out who was replaceable.
Analyzing them.
He was figuring out.
Is he a fucking sociopath?
To me, a little bit. Like, I don't like him.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm no doctor, but
yeah, I was studying psych for a while.
Oh, that's right, you did.
I'm like kind of a doctor.
I feel confident saying it then.
I think he's a little bit of a sociopath. I think he was literally finding out who was replaceable, where he could fit in, who he could lock down in this. He has always looked as the Stooges as like a vehicle for power, which was not what the Stooges, they were the first punk band. They were making music, they were making art, they were expressing themselves, they were saying fuck it. Like, they were never, as much as they wanted success, they were not looking for power, they were not looking to dominate anything. Like, they were just being weirdos, they were being themselves. And he already enters it from this sort of like sinister mindset, because that's just kind of the dude he was.
It's probably a fucking
ugh. Do you think, we're going to look it up later.
Yeah.
How much do you want to bet that he's a So now there's a guy, Billy Chatham, who was in the band as a second guitarist. Williamson sees him as replaceable. He doesn't immediately get in the way of Ron yet. We're going to see this build, but he wiggles his way in, but he gets hepatitis. He's sick for 6 months, and so the whole band isn't doing anything.
Right.
For 6 months, the Ashton brothers, Iggy, everyone's just kind of back home. He's sick. Iggy's going to go out to New York during this time, but the band is kind of on hiatus as a band.
Right.
And Iggy is still working the scene.
This is when he's hanging out with with Bowie and Lou Reed at Max's Kansas City.
1971.
Yeah.
He goes to New York. This is where he really hits New York. He hits the ground running. He meets David Bowie. He becomes a star of Max's Kansas City. I think the next episode we're talking about doing, definitely one of our next episodes, we're going to talk about some of the most iconic venues. And Max's Kansas City is a character within itself. I have been reading a lot on Max. I actually got a really cool book.
It is a character in the story of punk rock.
It is 100%. And it goes before then. It started with Andy Warhol and Patti Smith. And now this is sort of like the second wave of Max's Kansas City.
Second wave of Max's?
Absolutely.
This is so cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's overlap. But like Iggy, Lou Reed, Bowie, that's ushering a new era.
Three of them are like these little, the three best friends that.
Actually, the first
had.
night, do you want to know like lose a shit
tea?
talker?
Do you have any tea on
I got
this?
tea.
Okay.
So the first night that Iggy meets Lou Reed, Danny Fields is calling him up. He's like, you got to get down here. You got to get down here. Get out here. Iggy doesn't feel like going down. He goes, he meets Tony DeFries, Iggy's manager.
Yeah.
And then they click. And then DeFries is like, you got to meet Bowie. And as they're approaching, Lou Reed allegedly says to Bowie, don't talk to this guy. He's just a junkie. About Iggy.
Also, like, fucking pot kettle, dude. Like,
Pot and kettle big time.
yeah. This guy's a junkie.
This guy's a junkie.
As he's pulling his
As he's
sleeves
like,
down,
he is like, don't
hiding his track marks.
mind your business.
But you're a
Yeah.
little shit kicker that Lou Reed does.
Yeah, but that's him. He's so snide.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, he could have been doing it to stir stuff up because he loved the plot.
Yeah.
We went over this in our
liked
Lou
to
Reed
do it for
episode.
the
Like,
plot.
he lied too.
Yeah.
Like, he might have not have even known that. Happily.
Yeah.
So,
Is this when Iggy meets Tony DeFries?
This is when Iggy meets Tony DeFries. He meets
Who
Bowie.
becomes such a huge part of his
Bowie finds him immediately just so lovable.
Oh my God.
He thinks he's so sincere and so sweet. They all go out for dinner. Iggy is starving. Tony DeFries, Bowie take him out for dinner at like 2 a.m. To a diner. They all hit it off. They are infamously together. Tony DeFries starts managing Iggy. He's like giving hardcore mafia vibes.
Right.
He is like such a character. He's like he's all about selling it. So he's like, show up
Selling
in a
the
limo,
image, yeah,
throw
yeah.
money around, spend $200 on a pair of pants. Like, he wants to make you look like a rock star so you become a rock
Right.
star. He is all about fake it till you make it. And he bosses people around and they don't know where he gets his money from. It's all little mob vibes.
I think the mob was very involved in the record industry in general.
You think? I don't know a lot about that history. That's probably a book out there I
There
should
was
read.
definitely there was some points in time when they would literally they would be invested in an album and they would lean on the radio DJs to play their album so it would sell more.
That's so, yeah, sounds right.
Yeah.
Sounds like every major like industry
Yeah.
ever.
It was just an industry, in a way. But it's true that Tony DeFries is not interested in the Stooges. He's interested in Iggy Pop.
He's been trying to get Iggy to do a solo career this whole time. And the way, like, we see James Williamson trying to separate Iggy from the Ashtons, we also see DeFries trying to separate Iggy from the Ashtons and James. Everyone's kind of fighting for a piece of Iggy. Bowie and Iggy, they hit it off. They become fast friends. They're also a really good match. They sort of save each other because Bowie has talent and support, but he's a bit directionless, and he's coming to New York and sort of soaking it all up.
Yeah.
Iggy has so much direction, but he has never been given the proper support to make it commercially. And with Iggy being sort of the pioneer of punk and getting into drag and bringing Bowie along for the ride, he makes Bowie more interesting, and then Bowie gives him the help to be able to a little more pop sensibility. Every one of Iggy's songs, like Iggy shines best when he does the lyrics. All of Iggy's solo work, his most famous songs, his biggest sellers are when other people are writing the music and he's focusing on the lyrics. Right. And Bowie brings that structure and that support. And so they really help each other out. And it's like, who made who? They're just a really good like yin and yang together.
Yeah. And Tony DeFries is behind both of them at this point in time.
Yeah, just throwing money at him. Yeah.
And he invites Iggy to London to try to kickstart his solo career, quote unquote, right?
So now they're kicking around. Iggy gets back together with the band. DeFries and Bowie are back in London, and they fly Iggy out at first, just Iggy. And Iggy insists on at first just bringing out James.
Right.
And then they start working together, and people are like, their songwriting is good. Like, fuck James, but like they're clearly a good. If you listen to Raw Power, they start working on this third album. They're clearly like people are calling him the new Keith and Mick. Iggy starts referring to him as his secret weapon.
Right.
Like the guy or not, They work well
write,
together.
yeah.
They know how to write together. They start trying out all of these different musicians
Right,
for
they're trying out studio musicians
for bass and drums, and they basically were like, "Oh, we hate British people."
Yeah.
Like,
Williams is like, these are a bunch of long hair weirdos.
yeah, they fucking hate everyone. They're like, nothing's happening here.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like T-Rex is happening.
Right,
like
right, down
lots
the
of
street,
stuff is happening
around the
in
corner.
1971, 1972 in London.
Right.
They're like, fuck this. They auditioned like 150 people. What happens now is there's a big miscommunication that is causing a rift where to Iggy and James, they couldn't find anyone better than the Ashton brothers. You guys really are the best, therefore we have to bring you out.
Right.
Nobody's better than you. The Ashton brothers perceive
their
it as
perspective.
what you tried out everyone else in the world and we're your last
ditch.
call.
Yeah.
And there's such a different telling of the story based on who you hear it from. Another problem is they have James Williamson on guitar. They couldn't find a good bass player. James Williamson says, Ron is one of the best bassists ever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put him on...
Very convenient thing to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Manipulative, but maybe true.
Well, he is a fucking
He is a great
bass player.
bassist. But Ron takes it as, oh, what, you took over guitar and you're just sticking me on the bass because you need me? So again, the way it was intended and the way it was received doesn't necessarily align. That being said, Ron took that job and ran with it.
And it ended up being the best thing that could happen for that album.
If Ron didn't want to be on the bass, doesn't show when you listen to those bass lines. Sounds like a guy who's killing it.
Well, his brother's on drums. Like bass and drums together, the rhythm section. When you have brothers doing that,
why is it so good? It's like when two brothers are the lead singers.
Yep, and they're singing the harmonies.
Or singing harmony, or two brothers are in the rhythm section.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Like y'all's connection just
That's showbiz, baby.
showbiz. They were shining through. So they spent 1972 in London writing what would come out to be Raw Power. At some point, Iggy's like, Bowie takes a lot of creative control. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't want Bowie in the room writing anymore. And this becomes a James and Iggy show, and they're the only two that get writing credit.
Right.
The Ashton brothers get no writing credit.
Fair. I'm sure that they were involved in some
But they're treated sort of like studio musicians,
really
even once they're brought out. This is the only album where the Ashton brothers get no writing credit on any of the songs, which is James' design.
Yeah.
They're practicing, this is the schedule they're keeping. They're practicing every day before they start recording while they're in London from midnight to 6 a.m.
Love that.
Then I've kept those hours before I get it.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely the time when you can be sleaziest, and that's a sleazy album.
Well, like I said in our first episode about him, I said no matter what point of his life he's in, no matter what a mess he's in, Iggy puts in the work.
Yeah,
he puts in the hours. So he might be practicing from midnight to 6 a.m., but he's practicing for 6 hours every night, regardless of the lifestyle he's keeping. He never phones it in terms of effort, and we're gonna see that in the making of Raw Power. Right. They put it together. DeFreeze hears it, and DeFreeze is like, "This is trash." DeFreeze is like, tells them to go make something else at first. Yeah. At first, his first reaction is, "You got to get back in that studio and do something altogether new."
And they even try to shop it to Elektra too, and
Elektra again was like, no. And then they basically were like, listen, the Stooges are going to do what they're going to do. Elektra, by this point, by the way, to backtrack a little, had already kind of given up on them. And they were already kind of uninterested. And I think this was this Columbia?
That ended up releasing it,
Yeah.
I don't even think
so.
They were
They're
on
already
Columbia,
they're already making Raw Power in defiance to like this prediction of failure.
Right.
Like they are already making this in the face of negative belief in them, like of people rooting against them and expecting failure. So it's already so raw and punk. And actually the last track on Raw Power was intentionally made the last track to sort of be a like, we know what you think of us. Fuck you for already sending us off and thinking so little of us. So this was made in the face of this negativity to begin with, but it comes out, everyone's like, this is trash. So what does the record company and DeFreeze do? They go, all right, Bowie, you're going to mix it.
Well, just to like, we didn't say like Bowie wasn't the producer on this album, which we originally thought that. Iggy ended up producing this one by himself for the first time. So when the record comes out and Iggy has done a mix of it, the record label's like, fuck that.
Iggy is not good at mixing.
It's not
There's an Iggy Pop mix of the first album.
Yeah, don't bother.
Listen to John Cale's.
Listen to it just to get the perspective.
Because you will learn. If you are a nerd,
yeah.
If you're a nerd, listen to it. If you're just a fan of music and you're not so much nerdy for like Iggy Pop's character and the way his brain works, Let me
skip
save
it.
you
You
some
can
time.
skip it.
Just listen to the John Cale mix. He doesn't want Bowie producing it because he doesn't want Bowie to have complete creative control. But he wants Bowie's name on the record.
Ooh, sneaky.
He wants his credibility.
Yeah.
So he goes, okay, Bowie can mix it. Then we get his name on the record. We get his support. We get the credibility that comes with
Absolutely.
that. So Bowie has 1 day to mix it.
Wait, they gave him 1 day?
They gave Bowie 1 day
24 hours?
to mix this. Iggy Pop, because he's not a producer.
Oh, that's right.
He had a 24-track reel-to-reel tape
machine,
deck,
yeah.
and he used 3 of the tracks.
He's like,
So,
this should be fine.
This is so Bowie comes in and he's like, what is there to mix?
Yeah.
Like, there's only so much you can do when all of the
Bass
guitars
and drums are on one track, 2 guitars on the other, and Iggy's
vocals. He adds, like, some of what he does. There's 2 tracks that he adds a little bit of echo to. Like, he tries to mix the levels best he can. There's not a lot he can do, and he's given 24 hours.
He does a pretty fucking good job.
He does a good job. I mean, I love it.
Yeah.
I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
So what Iggy will say is, like, he's like, well, my version, like, years later, he's going to say, my mix is exactly what you're going to hear for the next 30 years in punk. He's like, my mix was, like, aggressive, in your face, chaotic. He's like, that's what all the punk bands to follow sounded like.
Right.
And Ron Ashton actually called Bowie's mix Iggy and Bowie's artsy fartsy mix. So Ron was also like, I don't know, Bowie's not as punk as them.
Yeah.
You know? Like, for better or for worse, he's just his own guy.
Right.
But he's an alien, but he's not punk.
Yeah. I love how, like, it was okay. I was watching this video the other day where they're like, you know, people were non-binary and bisexual a long, long time ago. They were just called themselves alien and everyone was fine with it.
Yes, it's so funny.
They're
like
not from Mars.
Yeah. David Bowie, are you queer?
Yeah.
No, I'm an alien.
Did you send me that video about that?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Our friend David sent it to me.
Oh,
yeah.
cool, yeah.
He's like, I'm not gay.
No, I'm not gay. I'm an alien.
I'm an alien.
From Mars. My name is Iggy Stardust.
Straight aliens hook up with Mick Jagger sometimes.
Like
It's our culture.
It's part of the culture.
Our wives cry in the living room while we hook up.
Oh my god, what a story.
I have a great David Bowie quote, since he probably won't get an episode in a punk history, but maybe. I saw this interview the other day with him. It's like, a lot of people think it's just so fabulous being like a world famous rock star with a model wife. And it is.
That's so good.
It's very him. And it is. Yeah. Like, no complaints.
Bowie mixes this thing in 24 hours. The record labels accept it, right? They're like, okay, this is what we have.
Well, it doesn't come out for almost a year.
That's right.
So
yeah.
between the time this is recorded in London and by the time that it happens
Which
here
is
later.
not a common practice at this point in time.
No.
In this era.
Well, and it wasn't because it was being carefully handled.
Right. It was.
Or promoted. The record company didn't support them really anymore. They were all but completely uninterested. And the band felt this and was becoming uninterested in the record company too. And what happens is, within the time of it recording, the band is falling apart. The Ashtons are done. They're feeling...
In an epic way.
Yeah, in a huge... Like, Ron has felt... feeling like adding insult to injury, and then he blames James Williamson and the heroin use of James and Iggy together.
Yeah, and at this point in time, Iggy's like, some shows he shows up and some shows he doesn't show up.
And when he does show up, he's more fucked up than ever. He's aggressive, not in the way that marks the Stooges.
On the hot way.
He's a mess. The record company drops him entirely. He is literally homeless in California.
Mm-hmm.
He feels abandoned there. David Bowie hears of this going on and is like, I honestly think it's in his best interest if I don't intervene and I let him figure it out, which I don't love. I don't know if that was a cop-out, but Iggy's got nobody.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that a bummer?
I mean, everybody gets to the point with their addict where they're like, I can no longer be there for you.
Yeah, I don't know if
they
he was going to be serving him or
I
not.
wonder if that's what it was.
Iggy feels abandoned, understandably. And
Like-
the record company, one, out of being done with him and his bullshit and his drama, and two, thinking he doesn't care, they release the album. They pick a photo and a font and everything album cover without talking to any of the Stooges. They put out, and Iggy hates it. Iggy hates the photo they chose. He hates that they use this like drippy monster font. Like he feels
horror film
like
almost.
a horror film. Like he feels like they're trying to portray him as this monster. And he's like, no one checked with me about the album artwork, but they didn't care, and they assumed he didn't care because he was such a mess.
He just disappeared off the face of the planet, essentially.
Yeah, he's gone. So by the time this comes out a year later, the Stooges are
A
over.
fucking mess. They're over.
They're over. And like we're going to see them reunite in different forms at different points.
Right.
But for the sake of this being a podcast about punk history, the formative band the Stooges were, the first 3 albums are like what I think are the most important things to talk about in terms of like we're going through punk chronologically, in terms of like the next bands to come after this and what's on the heels of it.
Well, I also feel like at this point in time, like other bands are picking up the mantle and they're carrying it on. You know what I mean?
Do you know what's interesting too? Is that they were doing punk before punk was punk. And then there was a developing punk scene happening, but it's between when they recorded their first album in 69 and Raw Power came out in 73, I believe, the punk scene was starting to pick up. But because during that time, they were being tried to be made mainstream and tried to be put out there in commercial by these different labels at different points that were producing them, they were missing out on the actual punk scene they had started that was going on underground, trying to make commercial success. Then that didn't happen for them. And now they're back in the real world where punk's happening and they're still such their own thing. They're such aliens that they sort of missed the boat. They like invented punk rock and then missed the whole thing.
Right.
They missed out on the first phase of punk rock, even though they started it.
I feel like Iggy said something about coming back to New York after the Stooges fell apart and being like, wait, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah.
He wasn't expecting all of these people to be like, Iggy!
Yes, yeah.
That's crazy.
They like created punk and then missed out on like its childhood.
They started a movement, man.
They did.
Fucking Stooges.
And just by being fucking weirdos.
I have a playlist on our Spotify that is some of our favorite. And
I might have to update it, but
we're probably going to be adding to it. But please check that out if
you
want to
follow us on Spotify.
If you want a sort of either an introduction to the Iggy and the Stooges or like a refresher or just a good playlist.
I would say follow us on Spotify because we're doing that. We're doing these playlists for every episode, every band we do, whatever we've talked about. Follow us on Instagram because I need to be posting more, but I definitely do some fun little things, some fun stories. We post pictures of whoever we're doing the episode
talk about
on.
Our haters.
Oh my God, I share all of our favorite hater comments. I have a whole highlight of stories of, should we talk about our Iggy Pop hater comment?
Yeah, we can.
All right, before we sign off, something to make you laugh. We got a comment. I posted a reel. Part 1, we did an ongoing bit. We must have done...
Well, we've had this bit for years.
We and everyone who knows who Iggy Pop is have a bit about how he does. Everyone in the world has an ongoing bit about how Iggy Pop never wears shirts. Never. It's a very common joke. Yeah. And I posted on our Instagram profile a bit where I said he has a phobia of shirts. And this man commented on it like... When did Iggy say he had a phobia of shirts?
When did he ever state he had a phobia of shirts?
Stop letting people who don't know what they're talking about make shit up. First of all, I do know what I'm talking about, and I make shit up. Yeah. Okay, both of those things are true. Second of all, I literally had to comment like,
it was a joke.
So this was a joke? Yeah. And no, I just want to on the record. I want to make it clear, I am not formally making a statement where I make a true claim that Iggy Pop has a phobia. It's called vestophobia. And I don't think he has it.
I don't think he has it either.
I don't think he has vestophobia.
He thought I don't think he has it. It's a fucking joke.
No, I do think he doesn't like wearing shirts.
That guy thought that Iggy actually had a phobia of shirts.
That guy thought I was serious. And there's a whole highlight. I have a whole reel of haters. All of our hater comments. So far, none of them have hurt my feelings. So far, they've all made me laugh.
I'm really proud of you.
Yeah, thank you.
All of this to say, follow us on Instagram.
Follow us on Spotify.
For some other funny bits and on Spotify.
Yeah.
Don't forget to subscribe and like on YouTube if you're watching.
Yeah, we don't really promote our stuff the way most people do. Please give us a like, give us a follow. Thank you for listening.
Share it with your friends who are weird and nerds like you.
Yes, and if you didn't like it,
get your own
fucking podcast.